All right, excellent. All right, my name is Ryan Schmaltz. I work for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in the Education Division. You guys will be also meeting two biologists that work with sage grouse, Laurel Berkeley and Vanna Bacadori. One out of Helena and the other out of Butte. So you'll get to learn about some cool things that they're doing right now too. But before we get started, just want to thank the sponsors that made this all possible. You can see those right behind me here. So the following, everything that we're going to go over, sounds really real, and it is real, but they're based on true stories. So the challenge is a collaboration of some different information of all of us involved put together. All right, so raise your hand if you've already taken a look at the challenge and read it. All right, so kind of new to you guys. Yeah, I'll introduce it to you then. So Winifred Wilson, you can see her picture right here. Winifred Wilson is a rancher, most of all, but she's actually a teacher and a naturalist too. Really cool lady, and she has an offer for the students of Montana, you guys. She wants you to study her land, the natural resources there, and the data gathered by wildlife biologists to come up with unique recommendations for a conservation easement. So, has anyone there heard about a conservation easement before? Raise your hand if you have. Excellent. All right. So, anyone here? Does anyone here live on a ranch? Does anyone live on a ranch? No. No one in the class. Does anyone know someone that owns a ranch? All right. Excellent. So, it's an important thing, and it's a special thing too. They're stewards of the land and the wildlife that live on it too. So, this conservation easement, what it is basically a partnership. And what that easement does is it prevents any future development, things that could be harmful to the wildlife and their habitat, but allowing a working ranch and also providing public access for things like hunting and fishing like that too. But if your guys' recommendations aren't approved by wildlife professionals, she's considered partnering with her family friend, Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith has promised to help the family make some good financial decisions for the ranch, which include a small acreage housing development, spraying sagebrush to increase the grass on the ranch, farming new areas of the ranch, selling the mineral rights to the highest bidder, promoting exploration for natural gas, and creating an off-road vehicle area. So those are some of Mr. Smith's great ideas. So if you guys can watch this video here real quick, this is going to show you what's happening right now with Winifred's favorite bird on her ranch. All right, so what's Winifred's favorite bird? The sage grouse, yeah. So you actually got to see a male and female sage grouse on the lek there. And the male sage grouse, it's the word that a scientist would call it. It starts with an R. What's that?
Rooster.
Rooster, yes. All right, so they're roosters, and the females are? Hens, yes. So I have two examples here. I have the bird on a stick, which this is usually, if you go to college, one of the ways that scientists will study birds. And then there's a mounted hen sage grouse here. The roosters are larger, and some of the neat things that you got to see in the video is they had those eye combs, those yellow things that popped out of their head. That look really cool. And then they have these stiff feathers on their chest. They can bump into each other when they're fighting. And then you saw the air sacs that they puffed up. What do you guys think those air sacs do? What's the adaptation or the function for
them? A little bit louder, please.
Making them look bigger.
Making them look bigger.
Yeah. So if you guys have ever been out on the prairie, you can see a long ways, and you can also hear things a long ways away too. And when they're puffing themselves up, they're trying to establish dominance, like they're the toughest rooster around. Makes them look big. You can see them from a long ways away. And then when they release that air out of their air sacs, what it does is makes that noise that you're hearing. And if you guys look at a bird ID book, it's going to say that the noise that they make, it sounds whoop, whoop, whoop. And that's the air getting released out of their air sacs, and you can hear that noise from a long, long ways away. Any questions before we move on about the grouse? Some things that you saw? All right. So who here watches the news at night? Who's watched the nightly news? Raise your hand if you do. Oh, I wish more did. But this next video here is an outdoor report, and you'll see these on the news all the time. And this is one about sage grouse. Watch close, and I will quiz you guys about them.
It's time of day to count the sage grouse on the lek so that you don't disturb them is to get here before daybreak. By the time it gets light enough to count, the birds are used to me sitting there in the truck, and so I'll stay long enough until I get a good count of the males, which are pretty easy to see, and then the females, which are much more difficult to see.
Just like the sound of a bugling elk announces that fall is on its way, spring is announced by sage grouse, displaying on their ancient leks found in the wide open sagebrush plains of the American West.
Sage grouse are an interesting species. We refer to them as having a narrow niche. That is, that they're very specifically adapted to the sagebrush grassland habitats. As a whole, the sage grouse has declined in some states up to 50% or more. In Montana, we're fortunate that we have still vast areas of sagebrush grasslands. One of the reasons is the fact that we have a lot of traditional ranching in the state.
As summer progresses, the birds will seek out areas that are less dense with sagebrush and have high succulent forb content to them. And then in the wintertime, they'll seek out areas of denser, taller sagebrush.
The sage grouse doesn't have a muscular gizzard with grit in it, and they can't digest hard foods like seeds. And so in the wintertime, the sage grouse's diet is made up of the leaves and shoots of the sage. This is Mike Gurnett, out among Montana's Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
So, some questions kind of just review here. A lek. Has anyone been to a lek before? Raise your hand if you've been to a lek. Anyone's been to a lek? All right, so my experience with the first lek, I guess, I was probably in elementary school, and I was in our backyard playing, and I heard these weird noises. And all of the grouse species make weird noises. And there was a sharp-tailed grouse. It sounded like laughing. I remember like walking up and looking and seeing these birds look like they were dancing around out there, and it was incredible just to see that and the display that they were doing. It was something real special. But now, when I grew up, I was actually in college. I went back, and the area where the lek was actually was mined, and they were taking scoria, a rock out of it. So the lek is gone. You don't even really see sage grouse, sharp-tailed grouse around there anymore. And which is really kind of sad. But you guys live near Kalispell, and you'll see the distribution maps that I show you. The populations of sage grouse, are they doing good? Thumbs up if they're doing good. Thumbs down if they're doing bad. Not so good? All right, so throughout their range, their populations have definitely decreased. Something that's personal to you guys in your area, too. We've talked to the numerous schools today that were, from the Bitterroot Valley and the Flathead Valley up where you guys are at. And you'll notice that that's an area that there used to be sharp-tailed grouse and sage grouse, and there's no longer grouse there. What's the word we use to describe an animal that is no longer found in an area? You guys know? I'll give you a few seconds to talk to each other. Let's see if you know.
Use a hand. Who's got it? Who knows? An alien? Brooke, what are you going to say? You said it, though. Close. Expunge. It's an X word.
Exported.
They're real close. It's extirpated. You guys heard of extirpated? So that means that the animal's no longer found there, and that's what the sage grouse is in your area. It's extirpated. So if it's gone from the world, what's that called? Extinct. Yeah, but extirpated's gone from your area. So personally, like in your area where you live, you probably feel like it's extinct, not there anymore. But in areas of Montana, it's doing really well. And Rick, he was the biologists are talking about how there's traditional ranches, lots of traditional ranches in Montana, and that's why the sage grouse is still doing pretty well in Montana, better than it is in other states. Some states, if you look at like a state to our east, like North Dakota, where there used to be quite a few sage grouse there, there's now just a few, maybe even just a couple birds. We're lucky to have thousands of sage grouse in Montana, but some states, maybe have hundreds or less. That's really sad, I think, to see a species like that disappearing. So you can see here, I have two examples. There's generalist species and there's specialist species. You'll hear that talked about a lot. So you can see on the right here, I have sage grouse, the specialist, and on the left, what's the example I have of a generalist species? It's something I guarantee you have in Kalispell.
Bird.
Oh, what kind of bird is it? All right, there's two kinds of doves that you guys will see, and there's the mourning dove, which that used to be the only dove that we'd get to see, and it migrated each year. It'd go south and it'd come back in the summertime. It's even a game species that you can go hunting for, the mourning dove. But this animal here, the Eurasian collared dove, is kind of like an alien that you mentioned before. It's an exotic species, an introduced species. It was actually escaped from a pet store in the Bahamas, made its way to Florida, and then made its way across the United States. And it does really well in about any kind of habitat or ecosystem, especially in towns and things like that. So it's doing really well, and that bird doesn't migrate, and it stays in your guys' town all year long too. So that animal is expanding its range, doing really well because it adapts. And then if you look at a sage grouse, is a sage grouse really good adapting to change? No, the sage grouse doesn't like change at all. It's so well adapted to live in the sagebrush prairie, and that's the only place it lives, and it does so well at thriving there, but any changes to the sagebrush prairie are detrimental to that species, and their population shrinks. So you can see on the map there how their population, the places, and the gray color are where you're not going to find sage grouse anymore, and then the green is where they're still found. And just like any other species, the fringes along the ends of their population is where they start disappearing from first. And if you guys can see, like some of the areas, it's disappeared from parts of Montana, and that's kind of sad to think about. All right, so I have some canned questions about sage grouse, some that you already know and some that are kind of tough ones. So the first question we have is, what do they eat? What do they eat? Go ahead.
Sagebrush.
Sagebrush, exactly. So the adults, they'll eat sagebrush year-round. That's just what they go around eating sagebrush all the time. But the biologists mentioned some other things too. What were some things that they mentioned, kind of seasonal food for the sage grouse? Some other things are insects. The young will eat insects in the springtime. That's really important to them. And then she mentioned succulent forbs. Well, forbs and things like flowers and leaves of plants. And maybe even if some of you guys have livestock or horses, you probably know that, like, if you eat alfalfa, they even eat alfalfa leaves at certain times of year. But during the winter, they only eat what? One thing? Sagebrush. That's it. So they need it to survive. All right, so do they migrate? Who thinks sage grouse migrate? Thumbs up if you think they migrate. Thumbs down if they don't. Well, it's kind of split. All right, so a migration can be defined as a seasonal movement. Some migrations are really long and some are kind of short. So what they have actually found is some of our sage grouse don't move very far at all. They kind of stay in the same areas. Then other ones make long movements. So the longest movement of sage grouse they found in Montana was a flock of sage grouse that was coming from Canada down to central Montana, 150 miles. So, do you think that they spend the majority of their time flying? Or how else do you think they would move? It's not like that someone put them in a car and hauled them here. What do you think? They walked, yeah. So a lot of their migration is walking, but they will fly too. So how many young do they have? I want with your fingers. Take your fingers if you think they have one young, two young. How many young do you think a sage grouse has? They actually have a lot of young. So I see a lot of people 2, 3. That might be something you'd see from like a robin that sits on its eggs in a tree. They'll lay between 6 and 10 eggs. So if you had both hands up, you were probably spot on. But they have lots of young, but it is tough to survive, and many of them don't make it. So what are some unique adaptations that sage grouse have? Does anyone have one they want to share with them before I kind of show you a few?
Their chest.
Their chest and the air sacs. Everyone keeps talking about that. So, yeah, that is definitely probably the coolest part. But just some subtle things, and this is a hen sage grouse here. You can see that they have great camouflage. That's one thing. What else? All right, so who has ever seen a pheasant? Raise your hand if you've seen a ringneck pheasant. All right, raise your hand if you've seen a chucker or a gray partridge. Those are all introduced species. I'm going to show you some of the differences, and this is a native species, our sage grouse. So you can see it has feathered legs. What's that going to do?
Keep his legs warm.
Keep his legs warm, yes. And then if you looked at his feet, what's unique about the feet on a grouse, and all our native grouse do this, there's these little comb-like structures that stick off of their toes, and they're called pectinations. So they grow these pectinations each fall and into the winter. It makes their feet wider. How is that going to help them out?
Won't sink as far.
Yeah, someone said something, they won't sink as far. Well, it acts like snowshoes, helps them stay on top of the snow. And then you can see with their beak, if you looked at a pheasant or an introduced species, their nasal opening isn't covered by feathers, but you can look at the sage grouse and it's covered by feathers, their nasal opening, and that helps them breathe when it's really cold. Who's been outside when it's like 40 below? I'm sure it's been 40 below in Kalispell before, right? It's so cold that it almost hurts to breathe, right? So to go outside when it's that cold, you'll wear a neck gaiter, put something over your mouth, or pull your jacket up, and that's just kind of like the sage grouse has feathers over its nose opening. All right, so what eats sage grouse?
Coyotes.
Foxes, coyotes, anything else? What about a bird? What kind of bird would eat a sage grouse? Hawks, falcons, owls, eagles. Maybe a snake would even eat an egg or something like that. So a good answer would be even almost everything. Everything that's a predator eats a sage grouse. So lots of things eat sage grouse. And then how long do they live? Show it with your fingers. Put your hands up. If you think they live 1 year, if you think they live 10 years, you can put your fingers up. All right, so I like the thing that your teacher mentioned, because he said, well, think of how many eggs they lay. Animals that don't live a long time generally have a lot of young. So actually, sage grouse are in this category. They don't live very long. They have lots of young, and they may only live a couple years. You would be an old sage grouse at 5 to 6 years old. That would be a pretty old sage grouse. All right. So where do they lay their eggs? Do they lay them up in sagebrush bushes or trees? Point up in the air if you think that's where they lay them, or point down if you think they lay them on the ground. All right, they lay them on the ground. So they don't actually go and build this elaborate nest where they weave everything together. They're not good weavers. But they'll go and find a sagebrush bush. You'll see in an upcoming video, and they kind of make a scrape in the ground and put some feathers and grass and things in there, and that's where they'll lay their eggs at. All right, and how big are they? I know everyone's like, all right, size, how big they are. How many pounds? Use your fingers again. I want a show of, well, if you think a sage grouse hen, let's hen first. If you think a sage grouse hen weighs 1 pound, put one finger up, or how many pounds? All right, so the sage grouse that I showed you, the hen, was probably about 3 pounds. If that puts in perspective. It's about a 3-pound bird. So about a rooster. How big do you think a rooster sage grouse could be? I see 5, 6, 7. So I see like a 7-pounder out there. That would be a pretty big male sage grouse. So 7 pounds. They could probably be up to 7 pounds. Pretty good. All right. So before we move on, do you guys have any questions directly about sage grouse before I keep cruising along? Nope, nothing pressing. All right, so you can see this poster here. This is the sage grouse step poster, and you could actually print this off and put it in your classroom if you go to the Sage Grouse Initiative website. It's there, and you can see that there's all these different animals that live in the sagebrush prairie. There's hundreds of native species of wildlife that live in the sagebrush prairie, and quite a few of them that aren't doing real well either. But the sage grouse is considered an umbrella species. So when you hear scientists say that, what's that mean? When you hear a scientist say, well, the sage grouse is an umbrella species. Talk with your classmates, and let's see if you guys can give me a good answer on what you think an umbrella species is. When a biologist talks, well, a sage grouse is an umbrella species. What's that mean? Well, he mentions a lot of different species, and really that's what it's all about. It's that the sage grouse population's doing well. If you're a biologist and you're studying sage grouse, if the sage grouse are doing well, all of these other native species are doing well too. So that's what makes it a good species to actually manage for too, is because if we're managing for sage grouse habitat and for sage grouse, who's it helping? Everyone else, all the other species too. So it's an important thing. I took this picture when I was antelope hunting, and there's what in the background? What's that black thing in the background?
Say it loud, like
That's a cow. All right, so you guys can see the sage grouse, right? Even though they're very camouflaged, they're standing right there. And it's not an accident that a lot of pictures that you take of sage grouse, there's cows nearby. They've even done studies that sage grouse will follow around cows with their chicks, because what do the chicks eat? We were kind of talking about this earlier. The insects and bugs. Well, bugs and insects, they hang around cows, right? So they'll actually, actually come around cows looking for insects and bugs and things like that. So this is another important topic, though. What's good for cows is good for sage grouse. And what's good for sage grouse is good for cows. So that's important. You'll see this here. What kind of animal do I have in this picture here? It's a coyote, yeah. So every time we have meetings about sage grouse, coyotes come up, predators. So is the coyote the only predator of the sage grouse?
No.
No, there's all these different things that eat sage grouse. So are predators the number one reason for the decline in the sage grouse population?
No.
Thumbs up if you think yes, thumbs down if you think no. Thumbs up if you're like, it's predators. Thumbs down if you think no. All right, so you guys say no. So what is the number one reason for the decline in the sage grouse population?
Humans spreading
Oh, it's real simple, because it's the same thing as every other species that's declining like this. It's habitat what? Habitat loss. Habitat loss. Yeah, so often when we look at other species that are declining, the major reason is habitat loss. So although predators are more successful when habitat is lost and it's fragmented and there's not many places for sage grouse to live, they'll be more successful, the predators. Ultimately, the problem is habitat loss. So here we have a picture. This is the biologist out at work. Winifred partnered with the biologist that you guys are going to meet to survey these sage grouse, to track them. This is kind of the heart and soul of this Inspired Classroom challenge here. And you can see this sage grouse has a GPS tracker on it. And I'm going to show you guys a video here. It kind of shows how it gets onto the grouse. So you can see in this video, it shows the grouse out on the lek, strutting around, and everyone's always so interested in these roosters and the way that they display, taking pictures of them. But are the roosters what we're after? Yes or no? No. We're after what? The ladies, the hens, yes. So you can see they're the ones that can tell us the most, are the hens. So you can see they captured a hen here, installed a GPS tracker on it, and the biologists, they're taking a look at the wings to see if that's an immature bird or if it's an adult. And by learning more about these hens, ultimately we're going to learn more about what else? The chicks. So you can see that this is Laurel here. She's one of the biologists that you guys will be working with, and she's looking at a sage grouse nest right there, and she's studying the chicks and doing a grazing study. And you can see here she's out actually tracking those grouse, and they'll tell you a little bit more how you do that in the next live event in May, which will be a cool opportunity. All right, so before you guys get flying ahead on starting this challenge and all excited about it, there's some things we need to review. You go out and you catch the sage grouse, and by putting the collars on, we get what? Starts with a D.
Data.
Another word for information.
Data.
Data. So we get data. So, so often scientists, we're all excited about collecting data, but what's the next step? The next thing we need to do with data?
Analyze.
First of all, we need to plot it. And I think in nowadays generation, we forget how it gets onto the paper, because collecting data, maybe there's fancy programs nowadays that can send it right onto a piece of paper, but you guys have already seen the map of the ranch. Somehow we need to plot that data onto the paper too. So also a critical part in this, you saw Vanna was out studying the sage grouse. She was on the landscape. There's field notes too. That's an important piece of this puzzle too, is to utilize those field notes. Then once you have that in line, you're going to be analyzing the data. I'm going to show you a short video on how to do that. And then you'll answer these questions. I provided your teachers with some worksheets that will help you analyze the data through answering these certain questions. But here's a short video on how to... All right, what we have here is we have 52 data points, and those data points represent the information the biologist gets each Monday from the GPS collar. And you can see on the data points here, there's 4 columns. We have a column for the date, the latitude, longitude, and biologist notes. So the latitude is the distance north or south from the equator between the north or south pole, and then longitude is the distance east or west from the meridian on the globe. And you can see the last column has biologist notes. And besides just getting this data on the computer, the biologist each Monday will go to the location where the bird was and get notes. And those are recorded here and are a critical piece of understanding the data. The first data point that we received from the sage grouse was on June 4th, 2018. And you can see on your data sheet the latitude, the first number that we're looking for is 47.72. You're going to plot that on your map by using a ruler, a pencil, and a pen. You'll take the ruler and lay it left to right on your piece of paper. The closest number to that point is 47.70. So first of all, put your ruler left to right and line it up on 47.70 latitude. Now you're going to move up with your ruler 2 marks, and that will put you in the correct spot. You'll make a line left to right. All right, now take a look at your data sheet and look for the longitude. The longitude is negative 107.76. Take your ruler, flip it around so it's up and down. Lay it on the closest number to that, which would be negative 107.75. And now you're going to move your ruler to the left. You can see 2 tick marks. And hold it still there. Make sure you're lined up on the top and the bottom in the same spot. Draw a line up to down. And now you'll easily be able to plot your data point. Take your pen, put a small dot where the lines intersect, and then you will put the date. Remember, is June 4th, so you'll put a 6/4 right there by that point. And now you have plotted your data. All right, so this is a kind of advice for you guys too as you attack this challenge. When we plotted the data before, I've done this with some classes, we broke into groups, and instead of looking at each Monday's data point, that's 52 of them, if you guys split your class into 4 groups and work specifically on certain months and share information, it only takes about 15 minutes to plot your data if you guys break it up into groups, which can help. The hard part is really analyzing the data, trying to figure out what is actually going on. There's a short video talking about some hints. Here we have an aerial photo of a commonplace or sage grouse in Montana, and you can see, just like you will be doing, there's a plotted data point here, May 14th, and the scientist has another date in the exact same spot. What would be the reason for a data point to show up in the exact same spot 2 Mondays in a row? What do you think? Well, the common answer is people think, well, the bird died. Well, let's take a look at the season. You can see here it's May 14th. Is it fall, winter, spring? It's spring. So what are birds usually doing in the spring? Nesting, yes. So hopefully that's what they're up to at this point. They'll probably be building or constructing a nest, which for sage grouse isn't as elaborate as a bird that may make a nest in a tree, but kind of a scrape or depression in the ground under a sagebrush bush. So you can see we have a few dates, a few Mondays where the bird shows up in the same area. Do you think the bird never moves, just stays in one spot when it's nesting? Probably not. The bird's probably moving around to go get food, leaving the nest, coming back too. So that's what those little dotted lines represent. And you can see all of a sudden, as a scientist, you have a plot that ends up in another place. What do you think's happening here? Well, the bird moved, and you can see that's quite a distance, so it seems that it's migrating to another place. You can see that we have another point here and one here. So looking at this picture, it might not look like a lot to you, but as you start to learn more about analyzing data, scientists will see things like this. So if you take a look at these white arrows here, take a second to just kind of think like a scientist what you might think are problems, obstacles, or what you can figure out from this. Well, scientists, they'll see right away, just like we talked about, that the bird nested in this area. You can see that the data points are far apart here, and that's probably a travel route for the brood. What's a brood? It's the hen with the young, the chicks traveling. And then you can see that the scientists might be concerned. You can see there's a creek which should be full of water in the spring that could be a hazard for the young chicks to cross. And you can see that there are some roads in the area, which roads can be hazards for sage grouse too. And also that they were hanging out in this area that's really important for this young sage grouse early in the spring is there's a wet meadow. So these are all important things that the scientists found while analyzing the data. So have you guys looked at the map yet? Have you guys had those materials? Raise your hand if you have. No? All right. So if you take a look here, that is the ranch. So it's a real place in Montana where there is sage grouse, and you guys will be plotting these data points and tracking these sage grouse. And they use different areas around the ranch, and you'll encounter many different problems as you look at it too. But you can see behind me there's a picture of Winifred, and she's looking out over the ranch. It's always been a quiet, peaceful place for her family. They've been there for generations. But recently things have changed. So the southeast end of the ranch, they didn't actually own the mineral rights. And now that area is actually being mined. So raise your hand if you've heard about mineral rights and issues like this before. A few people? All right. So sometimes when you buy a property, maybe the previous owner retains those mineral rights, and it can make things complicated. And actually what's happening here is they own the ranch, the Wilsons, but actually they're extracting these minerals, and there's some mining going on right now. And that used to be a quiet road, the main road that went through their property, but now about every 5 minutes one of these trucks comes down the road. I have just a cell phone clip here. So things have changed. It's not as quiet as it used to be. It's noisy and it's dusty, and to keep the dust down, what they've been doing is they're spreading a mixture of oil and water on the roads. It keeps the dust down. When it sticks to your car, it's a mess, and it's probably not good for the environment either. So here's a picture of the mine that they opened up on the ranch. What do you guys think? What's the issue with that, do you think? It's not just dust. I'm sure it's dusty, but what are some other issues that we're going to encounter with this? I can't hear you guys. I'm going to have to speak a little louder.
Habitat destruction.
Yeah, it's habitat loss. Just that's its perfect form right there. So that is gone forever, and there's some very special habitat all around this place too. So you can see in this picture, this is the plants that would make up a native sagebrush prairie. Many, many more different kinds, but some of the general categories. So obviously you got sagebrush on the left, and you have these native grasses and forbs, and they have really deep what? Roots. They have really deep roots. Just like the Wilsons on the ranch too, they have deep roots there, and it's important, and it creates a healthy ecosystem. So that sagebrush, it captures snow, it keeps moisture on the land, which is good for the grass, good for the cattle, provides habitat, food for sage grouse, and cover for the wildlife. It's very important. They consider it a nurse plant too, which means that the sagebrush helps the plants around it too. It provides almost like a certain kind of ecosystem around that bush, keeps it warmer and there's more moisture there. It's a good thing. So once the habitat's removed, just like you guys saw in that mine pit, do you think all these native plants are just going to reestablish themselves? Yes or no? Thumbs up if you think yes, they're going to make their way back. Thumbs down, no. So it's incredibly hard to establish native plants, and it's extremely expensive. If anyone's trying to plant native plants in their yard or something like that, they're expensive and hard to get to grow. But so good for wildlife. But you can see it's got an invasive weed. Does the invasive weed have very deep roots? No, it doesn't have deep roots at all. And then all the non-native grasses and things that will fill in, it just won't be good wildlife habitat anymore, even if it revegetates. So it'll be a serious problem for the ranch. So sage grouse, they don't like change. And that's why in the beginning the biologists were talking, the reason that we do have some healthy sage grouse populations in Montana is because we have a lot of traditional ranching. And things haven't changed a lot in most of Montana, and that's why sage grouse still live here. So an important piece that you guys need for this challenge is you need to understand conservation easements. And you can see here there's an article on conservation easements, 1 to 2 minute read. It's pretty easy to read and a very good article. And then you'll see that I have the logo there in the bottom. It says the Sage Grouse Initiative. You guys need to refer to this because this is a joint partnership between Fish, Wildlife and Parks, private landowners, NRCS, Forest Service, BLM. It's everyone working together to give information to help landowners with programs and with sage grouse. So you need to visit the Sage Grouse Initiative website. You're going to see things happening all around the country with sage grouse. Try to look at specific things to Montana or close to Montana because some of the issues with sage grouse are different as you go throughout its range. So before we fly away on this and get cruising, just need to review again. The first thing you do, you get data, and what do you need to do with the data? You got to plot the data. So you plot the data, and then what did I say was very important to make note of too?
Field notes.
Yeah, you needed to take a look at those field notes because for every day there's field notes that help you understand the full story of what's happening on that ranch. And then what do you need to do next? You need to analyze the data, which is kind of a tricky part. And then you'll answer the questions. The questions will help you analyze the data in a way that will be very helpful to you. Make sure you read about the conservation easements because that's what this is all about. And research sage grouse and what others are doing. What website do you go to research sage grouse? Sage Grouse Initiative. So if you do a Google search on the Sage Grouse Initiative, you're going to find an incredible wealth of materials on sage grouse that will help you be successful at this challenge. So ask your professional questions on May 2nd. Remember I told you there's 2 biologists that you're going to be working with. I had some questions from the last school that mentioned, well, we have sage grouse down in the southwest. They were mentioning, in the Ennis area. And they said that, they're different than sage grouse in other parts of Montana. Well, the unique part about the opportunity you guys have on May 2nd is the biologist that works at Butte works in the Big Hole Valley and with the sage grouse in southwestern Montana, which are very different than the sage grouse that live out in eastern Montana, which Laurel out of Helena does a lot of work in eastern Montana with sage grouse. So you'll learn about sage grouse in Montana, different areas, and how they're different. So, if you guys have any questions about that live event, what that might look like? So we're actually going to have like a live demonstration. They're going to go through how they actually capture sage grouse, what it takes, what it's like, and then they're actually going to talk about what their struggles are and obstacles in their area, and also how they actually track the grouse. So those are some very important things. And then in the end, you're going to make these recommendations for a conservation easement. So I think if you follow the instructions that the Inspired Classroom folks gave you to answer those questions, approach it in a way like this, it'll go very quick, and you guys have really good recommendations to provide to Mrs. Wilson. If you're digging for more, you can use the Ask an Expert tab. I guess there's actually a resource where you can actually send me emails, which will help me provide information to you about your questions, help you guys move along with the challenge. And if the teachers need a helping hand, we actually have teacher resources. So to be aware, for the teachers we have available, there's already plotted maps that we'll provide to the teacher, along with answers to the questions that our biologists actually provided that can help you guide the students and could be very useful to you. And the winning school is actually going to get a visit from our crew at Montana Wild, the Education Center. Has anyone been to Montana Wild? I know Kalispell's a long ways from Helena. Raise your hand if you have. No one? All right, so at our education center, great. All right, so we have a giant aquarium, all sorts of fish, even sturgeon. We have hawks and owls and snakes, and there's skeletons and furs and hides and neat exhibits and things. And we're actually, we have a traveling wild program. They'll put that stuff in this van, bring it to your school, and it'll be on display for you guys to enjoy for a day if you guys come up with the best recommendations for this challenge. So not only just saving the ranch and helping Winifred put her ranch into this conservation easement, but your school will benefit that you'll get to experience all this cool wildlife stuff that they'll bring to your school, and I'm sure they'll have free things and stuff like that too. So I think this is a pretty cool opportunity that you guys have. There's some really special people you'll be working with throughout this challenge, but do you have any questions for me that can help you, or some things that I may have missed?